Kia ora koutou, my name is Sophie Barclay and I am here with you tonight on behalf of Community Waitakere. And I've also got two lovely panelists with us tonight. We've got Ben Paris, also known as New Zealand Batman, and Fiona Davies, who's from AECOM, and I'll tell you a little bit more about them later. Unfortunately, very sadly, Matua Ricky Bennett couldn't make it tonight, which is, I'm personally very upset about that because I was really looking forward to hearing what he had to say. That's okay because it means that we should finish a little bit earlier and we'll have heaps of time for questions. So I'm going to crack into it. Just a quick note for those of you who haven't really used Zoom. Down the bottom you'll see you should be able to ask questions that will come through to us. So I've got hello from George Williams. Hello, George. And what else can I tell you? We're going to be recording this, so you can rewatch it so that you're committing these facts to memory, which is very exciting. And basically, I'll be sharing my screen with you to show you some presentation. We have some videos, and at the end, we'll be doing some questions for you as well, or you can ask us some questions, I should say. So first of all, we're going to kick off with a karakia. Just give me 1 sec and I will load this up. It's quite weird this because I can't sort of have any interaction with anyone, but if you're having an awesome time, please let me know in the comments. So welcome everybody. We're going to start with this karakia, and it's hi Susanna Murray. This is a karakia that someone actually wrote for Community Waitakere's Bat Walks. So you'll hear a little bit more about that later. And if you'd like to practice your te reo pronunciation, then you can read along with me. Nō reira, ka inoi tātou, ko rangi, ko papa, ka puta te atua o te ngahere, ko tāne. Tukua mai tō wairua, hei oranga a wairua, a ngākau, a tinana, whakahaumarutia mai mātou, I raro, I ngā pūhi kai ore ore o te ngahere I tēnei pō. Toro atu ngā aka aka ki hōhonu, kia whānui, kia tūrangatira te wao nui, mo ake tonu atu. Tihei mauri ora. Right, this is what's up tonight. Obviously, you all voted in the Bird of the Year competition, and you obviously all saw that the Pekapeka stole the prize when it's not even a bird. So although it was extremely controversial among the birding community, and I'm sure Ben can tell you about some of the funny comments he's been having as a bat advocate about that, it's been a great opportunity for the Pekapeka to be celebrated and learned about, because lots of people still don't know that we have Pekapeka in New Zealand. So thank you, first of all, for coming along, for taking the time out of your busy evening, and I really hope that you learn something. So to start off, I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction, very brief about Community Waitakere, who we are and what we do. Ricky couldn't make it, so I'll be giving you a few of the kind of Maturanga Māori aspects, although Ricky knows way more about it than me, so it's a shame he couldn't be here. Batman Ben Paris is going to be giving us Pekapeka 101, all the basics you need to know about the Pekapeka. Fiona Davies from AECOM will be sharing the results of some research that was undertaken in Te Wānui-a-Tiriwa, or the Waitakere Ranges, in 2019. So that's kind of really up-to-date research, because no doubt you'll hear more about it, but doing research on Pekapeka is quite hard, quite expensive. It involves being out all night, and it's one of the species that we still know the least about, so we don't actually know where all their populations are. So it's really important that we keep researching this little guy. Then at the end, you'll hear from me again to learn about what we can do to help the Pekapeka, so what actions we can take, and then we'll be doing question and answers. And as I said, please send those through any time, and we will have a look at them at the end. And I would like to acknowledge Te Kawerau Āmaki, who are the tangata whenua of Te Wānui-a-Tiriwa. So they are tangata whenua of Waitākere Ranges, where we work, and also Waitākere Ranges Local Board, who have funded us. Right, let's get into it. These are our panelists. As I said, Ricky couldn't make it. We've got BAT, Auckland Council's Senior Biodiversity Advisor and a Pekapeka advocate, known as the New Zealand Batman. You can check out his Facebook. He's got lots of good bat-related content. And we've got Fiona Davies from AECOM, who's the team leader of natural resources and the associate director of the environment department at AECOM. And she is extremely experienced in all aspects of environmental and ecological issues. So we're really lucky to have her along and to have her involvement with the research project that we undertook. Nō reira, let's start. So who is Community Waitakere? That's who I work for. We are a charitable trust and we're based in Te Kopua, Henderson. And we work for a connected, thriving, sustainable West Auckland. So that means we work with both people and we connect people to place. So we do a lot of community training, we run events, and we do a lot of environmental work. Around the edge, you can see some examples of our environmental projects. We do a lot of stuff with freshwater fish, including inanga or whitebait. We do, you can see down the bottom, we do Waitakere, which is W-A-I, not W-H-Y, thank you very much. Waitakere, which is citizen science, working with school kids and community groups, looking at how healthy our waterways are and doing some basic testing. We do marine meters squared, which you can also see down the bottom, which is a kind of coastal citizen science tool. And we've done lots of Pekapeka education, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. In terms of our Pekapeka work that we do community monitoring. So we put out bat loggers and we leave them out for a week. And then we collect them in and we go, oh, let's see if there are any Pekapeka at Piha. So we put them out in different places because at the moment we're trying to figure out where they are. Ben will talk a little bit more about that. But as I said at the beginning, there's so much that's unknown about the Pekapeka. We really need to just go hard with monitoring to figure out where they actually live so that we can start to protect those areas. Every year, Community Waitakere runs a bat walk. So we had 7 this year, despite COVID, and we heard Pekapeka on 5 of them, which is really cool. And we use a handheld bat detector, which you can see in the top right-hand corner of your screen. We also run a bunch of education and art events around the Pekapeka, and we also facilitate a group called the Auckland Pekapeka Alliance, which is a group of individuals from DOC, iwi, Auckland Council, people that have interests in Pekapeka. So if you are keen to be a part of that, you can get hold of me. I think my email's on the registration. All right, let's start off. So I'm going to try and attempt to give you some kind of cultural background on where we work and a little bit about the Pekapeka. So the Waitākere Ranges, as I said before, is also known as Te Wao Nui a Tiriwa. And wao is another word for forest. So Wao Nui means the big forest of Tiriwa. And this is Tiriwa on the left. So Tiriwa is an ancestor of Te Kawerau Āmaki. And he is what's called a turehu, which is like a fairy folk or spirit, and the first inhabitants of Aotearoa. He's also an ancestor of Te Kawerau Āmaki. And he accomplished heaps of amazing feats and is remembered through traditions, songs, and carving. And he was basically a giant that could cover the land in huge strides and go huge distances. And he also changed the landscape. So there's one famous story about him known as Te Unuhanga o Rangitoto, where Tiriwa moved Rangitoto Island. And you can see in this picture, he's clasping something to his stomach, and that's Rangitoto Island. So he moved it from Mercer Bay at Karikari to its home at the entrance to the Waitemata Harbour. And it said that he was sort of walking through the water and the water rose and rose and rose up to his stomach. And he's like, oh, so cold. And he dropped Rangitoto to where it is now. So yeah, Tiriwa is lends his name to the Te Wao Nui a Tiriwa, the Waitākere Ranges forest. And if you want to see that that carving, it's actually on the Arataki Visitors Centre. So next time you go there, you can go, oh, there's Tiriwa. You'll know a little bit more about it. Now, obviously, Pekapeka would have been way more numerous before kind of major settlement of Aotearoa, and it was actually a traditional food. So what happens was that kindling was placed at the bottom of a tree and a little fire was lit in one of the hollows of a tree where Pekapeka like to roost, and the smoke rose up, stupefied the Pekapeka, and they fell to the bottom into the hands of the hunter. So it's a lovely little, rather hairy treat. And maybe it would be like KFC, a hairy version of KFC. A whakatauki that's in use, you can see up there, he hōkioi rere pō, he pekapeka rere ahi ahi. The hōkioi flies in the dark of night, whereas bats fly at twilight. And the hōkioi is kind of this like mythical, terrifying bird that used to gobble up small children and prey on people at night. And it's actually thought to be the Haast eagle. But basically this whakatauki talks about people traveling at night. So it urges them to make haste to their destination before nightfall, lest they be gobbled up by the hōkioi. And the hōkioi also foretold death or disaster. So make sure you're not out too late is all I can say about that one. Lastly, there's a traditional pūrākau or story about mata ora and niwareka. And if you're interested to hear the longer version of this, you can just Google it online. But it's essentially about a man called Mata Ora, who was a rangatira or chief, and he fell in love with Niwareka, who is a turehu or a spirit from Rarohenga, which is the name for the underworld. Those two fell in love. They were living on this plain, and they had a big fight, and Niwareka went home, so she fled to Rarohenga, and Mata Ora followed her. He eventually returned to the living world with her, convincing her to come back to him, and he learned the sacred art of tāmako, or tattooing, among other things. And when they came back to this world, they were accompanied by creatures of the underworlds. They were accompanied by the ruru, the pekapeka, the kiwi, and another animal, the kakapo. So these are all parts of a full facial tattoo, which is also called the mata ora. And if you look at this image, the tifana, or the part on the forehead, so this part around here, that represents the wings of the pekapeka. And then there's other parts, for example, this bit around the nose represents the kakapo's beak, and the ruru's eyes, or the mōpok, you may know as the mōpok, that represents this part around the mouth. So the full facial tattoo, or mata ora, actually represents or pays homage to those 4 creatures of the night, which I think is particularly cool. That's it from me for the time being. So I am going to pass you over to Mr. Ben Paris, the Batman himself, who's going to give you a bit of Bat 101. And I'll just check, Ben, that you can hear me and you're ready to rock.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Oh, you're in a lake. You're in a river.
Oh no, this is Project Twin Streams. It's a beautiful place near my house.
Oh, lovely. Okay,
Yes.
So I am going to leave you with Ben. You take it away when you're ready, buddy.
Great. Thanks, guys. So first of all, I want to say that a bat is not a bird. The reason why we put this whole bat into the competition was to try and raise awareness, and we've certainly done that. So we're really, really happy that people are having these sort of conversations about our precious Pekapeka. So I'm just going to go through some basics of Pekapeka 101 and how you can become a bat spotter. So what is a bat? Well, a bat is a mammal, is not a bird. It's the only flying mammal. It produces milk. It has a very similar skeleton to our own, with the elongated finger bones making up the structure of the wing. Most people are familiar with the fruit bats over in Australia in the islands, but our bat are little tiny microbats who use echolocation. Now, echolocation is really, really useful for bats that fly at night. These 2 examples on the right there are international species, but you can see they've got classic big ears of a bat and really tiny eyes. Bats aren't as blind as bats, but they use this echolocation to build a picture of the world around them as they fly through the forest, catching tiny little insects. And the insects, the sound bounces off the insect and goes into those really big ears there. So we can't hear the echolocation calls because they're far above our own hearing range. So what we do is use bat detectors, which I'll talk about in a minute. But hopefully we can hear the bat through the bat detector, and it sounds something like this. A whole lot of clicks and buzzes as it finds its way through. And then as it tries to find its way through the forest and spot some food, those clicks and buzzes get really close together and form a feeding buzz like this. And we've also discovered that some bats have a little bit of a social pulse as well. They talk to each other in the roost, and it sounds a bit like this. So bats in New Zealand, they're Pekapeka, so the only native land mammals in New Zealand. There's the lesser short-tailed bat, which is represented in the red on this map, and the long-tailed bats, which are represented blue. The greater short-tailed bat went extinct in the 1950s, 60s, due to a huge rat plague. So we know that introduced mammals can play a huge part in the extinction of bats. So we need to take care of the remaining 2 species that we have. So this is the short-tailed bat. We don't have it in Tāmaki Makaurau other than on Hauturu, Little Barrier Island. It's got really big ears, like you noticed with the other bats. It's got a little piggy snout because it likes to crawl on the ground and sniff out little insects and nectar and other sort of goodies. I think it's a pretty cute little guy. This is a bat that we caught just before the very first lockdown in March last year at the Australasian Bat Society conference down in Te Anau. Now, these short-tailed bats are very, very important pollinators for our native flowers. So they provide a really essential ecosystem service. So we need to bring these short-tailed bats back to the mainland at some stage to make sure that we've got a fully functioning ecosystem. But the other bats we've got in Tāmaki Makaurau are the little long-tailed bats. They're a little bit smaller than our short-tailed bats. They've got little small ears, but you can still see these little ear ridges that they catch the sound with on this photo here from Kerry. Kerry's also got this photo here of, it's got some bat bling on it, so we catch it again. And it's also got a radio transmitter, which Fiona might talk about a bit later in the project we did in the Waitakere Ranges. So the threats to bats are the same for many of our and other endangered species like our birds, the pest mammals such as your stoats, your rats, your possums, and your feral cats. Roost disturbance and competition from some of the other animals as well. Forest fragmentation, which means that these the bits of forest are too far away from each other for the bats to fly across. We don't really know enough about how far a bat will fly to find another bit of forest. Another big one is the loss of habitat, which I'll talk about in a minute. And new diseases such as kauri dieback have had a huge impact on our bat populations, and the climate change may have a significant impact on our bats as well. So as I mentioned, the habitat destruction is a big one, especially in Tāmaki Makaurau. The amount of large trees that are being felled is a concerning problem. Not just our native trees. This can include bats like to roost in gum, macrocarpa, pine, willows, anything that's big, old and gnarly with some loose bark or some holes in it. They like to get in there with their family groups and have a bit of a snuggle in there. But these old gum trees might not seem so important, but they are really, really important roosting trees for our bats. And it's really important that we notice and check for bats before we fell these big old trees, because there's not many of these big old trees around, so we need to protect them. So how do we find these bats? Well, we use bat detectors, and these bat detectors are we use from the UK, like the one that this younger version of me is holding. It converts the signal that we can't hear into something that we can hear. And luckily, we've only got 2 species of bats compared to the UK. So we're able to easily distinguish which species we're looking at. And what we really want is the community to go out there and looking for bats, because they can play a huge part in trying to find bats. And we really want to work with the Pekapeka Alliance to try and put bats on a map so that we know where bats are and we can help protect them. Well, across Tāmaki Makaurau, we can see this older version of a map where we know there's bats down in the Waitākere Ranges in South Auckland, all the way up to the north where there's bats up near Lee as well. So we really want to try and add to this map, but we can't, bat experts can't be everywhere at once. So we want to try and get the community out there looking for bats with us. So if you want to be a bat spotter, there's some important things you can do. You can borrow a bat detector from Auckland Council. Once we're in level 2, I have to say, but there is a lot of demand for these bats for Christmas presents, and I'm told that the Magenta bat company has received a lot of orders from New Zealand in the last couple of weeks. So that's really, really exciting, and they are bringing them in express from the UK, which is great to see. But if you want to look for bats, you can look for bats in your backyard, your school, your local park. But there's some critical things that you need to find first. Bats need to be near a water source, like the stream behind me here. They need to be near open areas where it's not too cluttered for them to fly around the forest. They need to be near those big, old, mature trees, like I mentioned, both the native trees and the exotic ones like the gums, the macrocarpa, and the pines. And if you really want good bat spotting, go out on a warm night, because bats will be flying out a bit more regularly. So if you find all those 4 things and you think you might have those 4 factors, then you might have bats nearby. And we really want you to be out there and be a bat spotter with us. So here's my contact details. If you've got some more questions after this, please feel free to get in touch. Otherwise, I'll hand it back to Sophie.
Thank you. Now I've just unmuted Fiona, who is going to be talking next. So just 1 second and I'll get her to share her screen. Thanks for that, Ben. That was really, that's really cool to see that, that map, but also to know that there's just so many places where we don't even know where Pekapeka are. Right, I will hand you over to Fiona now. So go for it, Fiona.
Hi everyone, I'm really excited to be here this evening. So I'm here to talk to you about some research that I was involved in on the Waitākere Ranges, where we undertook radio tracking surveys of Pekapeka, and that was in the summer of 2018 and the summer of 2019. It was a collaborative project that we were involved with which involved Community Waitakere, AECOM, who I work for, and my team of ecologists, along with Auckland Council, including Ben, as well as our so specialist bat ecologists that we brought in to help us with the survey work, Ian Davidson Watts. So I'm just going to talk you through these surveys and tell you a little bit about how we did the radio tracking, and then at the end we're going to play you a short video about it. So this was a little bit of a different kind of scientific survey than what us ecologists would normally be used to. The main reason being that it wasn't just a research-focused project, it also had a strong focus on education and community involvement. So there was a combination of experienced ecologists and bat ecologists, as well as members of the community, other volunteers from Community Waitakere, Ark in the Park, and one of the main drivers of the surveys was not only to find out more about how the long-tailed bat was using the Waitākere Ranges, where they were and what they were doing, but also to train people and to help them understand a little bit more about the long-tailed bat that we have here in Tāmaki Makaurau. So the first thing that we would do, well, let me just tell you that we had 3 survey sessions. So there were surveys undertaken in November 2018, February 2019, sorry, November 2018, February 2019, and I'm missing one, but we'll come back to that. And basically there was 3 survey sessions undertaken, and the reason that we did that is bats use the landscape at different times of the year. So they would be using parts of the landscape, and say November would be different, which is when their mating season is, compared to February when their actual breeding season is. So we were really interested in seeing where and what they were doing at those different times of the year. So the first thing that we would do on a survey evening is we would go in and we would set up these harp traps, and we did them at lots of different locations so we could try and find bats from lots of different areas around the Waitākere Ranges. And we were particularly focused in the northwest of the Waitakeres, near Bethel's Beach, down at the Cascade Falls, the Opunuku Stream, the Waitakere filter station. And we would set these harp traps up in areas where we thought that bats would be flying through once dusk and the sun went down. And the idea of these harp traps is that these long strings go up into the air, and that bats will fly through, and they would hit those strings and not be harmed in the process. And they would fall down into these bags at the bottom, which you can see, those white bags, and they would be happily sort of sat there until one of an ecologist, the bat ecologist, would come along and then pick it up and process it and for the next stage of the survey. And as you can see here, there's volunteers that were involved. There was a number of different people that would come along in a survey evening and would help set up and help learn to set up these harp traps.
Sorry, Fiona, I think you might have a PowerPoint presentation, but we can't see that.
Oh.
So you just need to click on share your screen and then select your presentation.
That's a bit of a rookie error, eh?
That's no worries at all. Maybe you can skim through them, because I'm sure people would like to see what a heart track looks like. I still can't see it.
No, I'm just looking for it here. Hold on.
So if you look down the bottom, it should say share screen with the green box and the arrow.
Yeah, just hold on. I'm just looking for it.
Thanks for being patient, everyone at home.
No. Oh, hold on. There we go.
We do love looking at the background of that wherever you are. I'm guessing.
Well, this view is the Waitakere.
Yes, that's great. You just need to go down the bottom and click that. Yes, yeah, you got it. Perfect.
Yeah. So the view of my video is of the view of where we were doing our radio tracking surveys over the reservoir towards Anawata, and you can see the density of this bush behind us. But let me just show you the photos. So you can see there was a number of different volunteers helping us, and the focus of the research being community involvement. And you can see those heart traps. So sorry about that. You can see what those heart traps look like, and those strings, and how they would be. The bats would fly in and they would drop into those bags at the bottom, which is those white bags, before they were processed for the next stage of the survey. So the next thing that would happen is we would come along, we would catch our bat, which was not easy. Bat, as has been mentioned, they're not very common, they're very cryptic, very hard to find. So catching a bat was not an easy process. And one of the things that we did to help us with that is we used what was called a lure, and we would put those alongside the harp trap. It was almost like a speaker that we played bat calls out of. And this lure, which is a new piece of technology used by Ian Davidson Watts, who is our bat ecologist, it would emit bat calls from other bats that had previously been recorded, and very curious bats would come flying along and be lured into this harp trap, and would fly into the strings, and we would catch them. And we found this to be really, really effective. And probably in the past, it's been very difficult to catch long-tailed bats or short-tailed bats using harp traps without this lure. You have to try for many, many nights before you can even catch one. And we were catching multiple bats in one night. So after we have caught our bat, you will see that the first thing we'll do is we'll check the wings and look at the wingspan. We'll then measure the size of the bat, because we all want to collect this data as like really, really vital data for us for understanding Pekapeka and what's happening with them and the size of them. Then we would weigh them, which was a particularly important part, because in order to attach the transmitter on the back of the bat, which is what we use for the radio tracking and how we track the bat has to be over 7 grams. And these bats are so small, and these transmitters are a little, you can see the size of them in those photos. So any bat under 7 grams, we would release, because it just wasn't safe to put those transmitters on. And you can see that we would put a little bit of glue on the back of the bat, take a little bit of the hair off, and put a little bit of non-toxic glue on there, and put this transmitter on. And once that transmitter was attached, it would emit a beeping sound that we would then use to detect and locate that bat, which is a lot easier than it sounds in this dense vegetation and the dense habitat of the Waitākere Ranges. So we would then go ahead, once we'd caught that bat in the evening at night, bats obviously being nocturnal, in order to see what they're doing, we have to track them through the night. So that meant many sleepless nights, as in not a single hour, minute of sleep. If we were working, we did do it in 2 shifts. Some of us worked all night, some of us hardened ecologists, and then sometimes the volunteers would stay on till about midnight with us. But we would use these aerials, which I'm not quite sure you can see in some of those photos, but basically look like kind of an aerial that might go on the top of your house, for, you know, an old TV aerial. But these would be handheld, and we would drive around in our cars or be walking in tracks, around tracks, trying to detect these bats with the transmitters beeping away. And the interesting thing was these aerials will only pick up bats within a very, you know, fairly short distance of, you know, could be as short as only 50 meters, could be as far as nearly 1 kilometer, but it would depend on the height of where you could stand with your aerial. So the higher that you were, the more of a distance your area, and the less obstructions in the way, the more that your aerial could pick up the distance. But it wouldn't tell you where that bat was, it would just tell you the location or the direction that bat was. So you would have to end up we would do what they call triangulations, which we could then zone in on where that bat might be. And we would then record that bat, like where we thought that bat location was, and we would do that through the night as many times as we can. And you can see from the photo that in such dense bush, it was a very, very hard task, but very, very fun at the same time. So what we found from the surveys was that, what one of the most amazing thing was is that over the 3 sessions, we caught 16 bats, we tracked. 12 of them were heavy enough for us to be able to put transmitters on and to track through the night. And we did that for several days. So we did, it wasn't just one night we tracked them basically until those transmitters fell off. And some of those transmitters can stay on for up to 10 days on the back of a bat. So that was a lot of data that we were collecting, but also, you know, the difficulties of trying to move that through that terrain was something that meant, you know, difficult data to collect. And one of the other things that we would do through the night is we would track the bat back to its roost at the end of the night. So we would track the bat back to the tree as soon as sunrise was happening and the day was beginning, which isn't easier than it sounds, tracking a bat back to a tree in the middle of dense Waitākere Ranges. Sometimes we would go back in the middle of the day and try and do it a bit later once we'd had a sleep, because it was a very, very difficult task. And what we found is we actually managed to identify 12 of those roosts, and the majority of them were kauri trees near the Cascade Falls. And you can see from that map where all the red is, you can see that that's the end of Falls Road and near the Cascades. And you can see that area is where the majority of bat activity occurred. So we found that overall bats travel 1.2 kilometres to 3.5 kilometres, and that they were mainly using kauri forest and stream habitats, but also they did drop into what we would call peri-urban or kind of the edge of urban areas on lifestyle blocks in Swanston. And kind of the Swanston area, and we found that really interesting that we were actually able to track and show that those bats were coming out of the Waitakeres into like people's properties, which, you know, we know is occurring. We know that that's happening from the bat work walks and the other surveys, but we were actually able to see that happening on a live, on a live basis. It was amazing. And the other really cool thing we did was we confirmed that the bat population in the Waitakere Ranges was breeding, which was a bit of a concern previously. And we did that because we could see the lactating females once they've had their young, and also there was on other survey sessions, there was pregnant females caught. So that was a really, really great outcome from the research. So the question being, what does this all mean? Like, what are we going to do with this information? And it's been talked about before, but I suppose given the importance of kauri habitat to these bats in the Waitakeres, the effects of kauri dieback is something that needs to be considered for future bat conservation efforts. Given the majority of bat roosts are kauri, the amount of habitat they're using, it's a really important consideration in terms of conserving bats. And I don't know what the answers are yet, but yeah, it's something we need to be considering. Another important finding was that we found that bats were roosting outside of areas where pest control was happening. So usually you would really want to protect your roost areas with pest control. And so we found that there was some roosts occurring down in the Opunuku stream where there isn't pest control happening. So we would really be encouraging further pest control in some of these areas. And extending those out to really protect these bats and their roosts. And then the finding that we've seen these bats going into peri-urban areas where there is urban development happening, I suppose is, indicates to us that when we do have urban development in areas where we know there's long-tail bats occurring, is we need to have management controls in place, things like managing light and noise, and habitat fragmentation, which is, what Ben talked about, making sure that our gaps between habitat aren't too big. So these are all the things we that we've learnt and that we need to consider. And then of course, ongoing monitoring, like we want to be able to understand, is management helping, and what else is going on with this population. I mean, there's just so much more to learn. So that's it from me. I think hand back to Sophie, who's going to share the video of the documentary that was undertaken during one of the survey sessions for the radio tracking.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Fiona. That was really incredible. It's always so fascinating to hear how much work goes into all of this. Staying up through the night, etc., etc. That was amazing work. Now I've got a little video I would like to show you guys from our, sorry, just sussing out this Zoom business. Give me 1 second. Here we go. So this was a video that was taken on the research, one of the research nights that that Fiona was talking about. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to reshare because I just realized I forgot to share my sound. There we go.
You've got one of the rarest mammals in the world on the doorstep of New Zealand's biggest city.
There's Ben.
The reason we're all here today is to answer the question as to how will kauri dieback affect the local population, how will urban expansion affect the local population, but it's also to get the local community actually involved with the project, just to kind of raise awareness in terms of this population.
Can't really hear it. If I bring it in, it's getting just slightly a bit louder. you know, we set up a bunch of traps tonight, and when it gets dark, we're going to get in there and listen out for bats. We're going to be recording bat calls, hopefully, if they're out and about. And with any luck, fingers crossed, we'll catch a bat. And if we catch a bat, we'll tag it and track it. So here's a long-tailed caught in a heart trap. To try and get an idea of how old she is. Now, the way we do that is we look at the knuckles here. And if the knuckles are really well formed, then chances are she's an adult. Okay, so she's got 41mm long forearm, so that's her weight. And we chose the right place tonight, so very happy. Couldn't have asked for more. Yeah, great. It's a feeling of joy that you found the bat. You can find out more information to protect it.
What a wonderful video that is. Now, I am going to take you through some actions, because it's always nice when you learn about a creature that is in peril to know what are some concrete things that we can each do in our own lives to make a difference. So first of all, you may recognize these two creatures on the side. We've got the kakapo and Maui dolphin, and they are ranked nationally critical. And you can see on the right, I've got a little graph here, which is from, it sort of ranks just how endangered a species is. And you can see that the top section is actually nationally critical. So that's basically the highest level of threat. And what it means is the population is set to drop by 70% over the next few years. So essentially, if we don't do something about the Pekapeka and kind of try and turn its story around, then there is quite a high chance that it could go extinct, which is very sad. But luckily, we're learning so much more about this species. And a few years ago, people didn't really have any idea that we even had bats in New Zealand. And now, thanks to campaigns like the Bird of the Year, we are a lot more aware about this beautiful creature. So, I've got some hot tips for you. What can we do about it? The first thing is protect the old fellas. And what I mean by that is the big trees. They could be in your backyard, they could be on your property, they could be wherever. Even if they're dead and they have holes in them, they can be really useful for roosting. And bats can use over 100 different roosting trees. So if you looked in a cavity and thought, oh, there's nothing in here, it might actually be used another night. And yes, as Ben said before, that's even the exotic. So pines, willows, macrocapa, gum trees. We're seeing a huge trend now, and Ben, maybe I'll get you to talk to this at the end, but we are seeing a huge trend in restoration where a lot of these big exotic trees are being poisoned or cut down in order to put in native trees. And that's obviously a really positive thing in the long run, but that does have implication for our Pekapeka species, especially in areas where there aren't very many big old trees. So make sure you check for cavities before you do anything. And obviously there are some kind of central government legislation which has really affected this, particularly the changes to the RMA, where they removed umbrella protection. So I think in 2012 they made the change, and before 2012 you couldn't just go around and cut down any tree. You could only cut ones if they were under a certain height, and now you know, no trees are really protected. There's a few, but they have to be registered. So that's been quite a big issue for tree loss, particularly in Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland, but also for creatures like Pekapeka. And you can see some lovely sensationalist titles there, the Aotearoa Chainsaw Massacre and the Wholesale Slaughter of Auckland Trees. So long story short, try not to cut down trees where possible because they're used by lots of creatures. Second thing, scrub, check and spray. We've all been out, hopefully getting some beautiful walks, keeping us sane in this lockdown. And you've probably seen these signs about Cody dieback disease. Now, as Fiona said before, Pekapeka love to roost in Cody trees. And part of that is because of their loose bark, which is kind of like shingles, and they snuggle underneath. And we don't really know what effect Cody dieback is going to have on our Pekapeka, but as it's been shown through the research, we know that they use them as a roosting tree. So we just need you to really play your part, stick to the track, stay away from those closed areas, and please just follow the rules around Cody dieback, because that's one way to support our Pekapeka. Learn and educate. Well, you've done this tonight by coming along and learning, so you can give yourself a huge pat on the back for that. And the next thing you got to do is tell someone about what you learned, drop in some cool facts. In February or March, Community Waitakere runs our bat walks, or Hikoi Pekapeka, so you can like our Community Waitakere Facebook page and keep up to date with that. Before the talk, I put up this cool poster on the right, which you can print off at high quality, and also a resource for online learning aimed at school kids about the Pekapeka, so you can check that out. And also, as Ben was saying, you can borrow a bat detector and go out at nighttime, and that's so much fun to do. It's such a beautiful experience to be in the ngahere of the forest at nighttime. So I highly recommend that, especially if you've got a group of you, like some kind of a scout group or something, although I don't imagine that will be possible in the near future. Here's hoping though. Look at this picture on the right. That is a feral cat that killed 102 Pekapeka in a week. So yes, trapping pests is a massive part of helping the Pekapeka numbers to increase. Traditionally, the natural predator of the Pekapeka was the ruru, or the moorpork. And unfortunately now we've got a whole host more. We've got rats, stoats, cats. We've even got wasps, which is really horrible. They can get stung to death, which makes me feel pretty sad. And also the research that Fiona was talking about showed that Pekapeka were roosting in both areas that were pest controlled, such as Ark in the Park in the Waitākere Ranges, but also in non-pest control areas. And particularly during the colder months, where bats go into a state of semi-hibernation, which is called torpor. Remember that phrase if you want to impress your friends. That's when they can be more susceptible to predation, because obviously they're half asleep. So it's kind of like they're not as quick and they're not as awake. So if someone scuttles in there and starts to attack them, they're not going to respond as quickly. So what can you do? It's as simple as buying a rat trap or a possum trap to have at home. You can put one out by your compost heap, or if you're really keen on it, there's a number of pest-free groups. I've just put a couple up there: Pest-Free Waitakere, Pest-Free Piha, and you can search for a pest-free group on the internet. But I can understand that lots of people aren't into killing animals, but unfortunately it's part of our conservation story here, and getting rid of those introduced predators really helps creatures like Pekapeka and our native birds. What else can we do? Riparian planting. So that's a fancy way of saying plant along the waterways. So rivers are known as Pekapeka highways because they feed off insects that come out of the rivers and feed around the rivers. So if you want to do something good for Pekapeka and for water quality, 2 in 1, create habitat by planting trees. So that's not only going to be habitat for Pekapeka, but also for their kai, which is insects. And you can also join a river care group. There are a number of them out west. You can look up Project Twin Streams for more information. There's a whole bunch of them. There's Waipareda River Care group. There's just do a bit of Googling if you're into that. And another thing that we can do is think outside the box. Now, I am a scientist, but I'm also a writer, and we really need these creative people to engage with conservation, kaupapa, and with science, because to be quite honest with you, sometimes science can be a little bit boring and people get sick of reading PowerPoint. So if you're a poet, writer, artist, singer, a crafter, a maker, a fashion designer, we need you to think outside the box and try and join up with scientists. And what I've got up there is a flyer from an exhibition that we held in 2019. So a group of artists came out on the research trip that Fiona was talking about, and then their response was to make a whole lot of artworks about the Pekapeka. So I'm going to show you a quick video about that, featuring yours truly, which is not the reason why I'm playing it. So the exhibition came out of a collaboration between Community Waitakere and some research we're involved in. The Pekapeka tauroa, or the long-tailed bat, is found on the mainlands, but it's not very widespread in its habitat. We don't know much about it at all. We don't have any information about its population, where it's found, or the current trends, but we do know that it's a critically endangered thing, the cutting down of big trees, because they also like to roost in kauri. Predators is a massive one, so all our introduced predators. So we really just need to start becoming more aware about this taonga, because lots of people don't even know we have bats in this country. We've been working with artists that are here at Corbyn's Art Estate, and this exhibition was their response to coming along, seeing the Pekapeka tauroa in real life and learning about this rare and precious taonga that we have. Really small, really furry. Yeah, you know, because they're only the size of your thumb. It was awesome, the opportunity to go out and check out the Pekapeka and see where they're at.
So I felt pretty blessed to be out there amongst it all. It's a pretty incredible thing when you can hear them moving around. So my work looks at deforestation and habitat loss, and what I'm doing at the moment is taking pieces of native timber that I found in the rubbish side of the road, building sites, and trying to almost put them back together as a forest or as a whānau. It's amazing to see the different types of art that, you know, one creature can prompt and you know, an experience like that can provoke in the minds of so many different creative people. Mahi toi and art has a way of sort of softening, you know, the sort of the really quite rigid edges of data collection and the korero around that, I suppose, because I think it makes it quite accessible. The more people start talking about the Pekapeka tauroa and our native bats, the more we know about them and the more awareness there is about this creature, and we really need to, you know, get behind it and do more to save it from extinction. Sorry if you saw me jumping around before. My power cord wasn't plugged in, so my computer was going to die, which would have been a bit of a disaster. Anyway, another thing that you can do, donate. So we have created a fund on Give a Little called the Pekapeka Protection Fund. We've already raised $600, which is awesome. And we're just basically going to use this to buy more handheld bat detectors to give to community organisations that are going to be monitoring, so that we can find out more about that. So if you feel like you want to, or if you're in a position where you can donate, that's a really cool project for you to donate to, and it's going to lead directly into supporting citizen science and community monitoring. And look at that, that's the last one. So what I am going to do now is stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to bring up our beautiful panelistas, and we'll go through some of your questions. Now, if you have any other questions, please type those in the box. I will have a quick look up here. So I guess we can just start with Caroline's comment. If it's possible to track butterflies with trackers, surely it's possible to make a transmitter small enough to fit on all bats that you catch. Fiona, do you want to take that one? I think that sort of did fit on a bat, but perhaps you can. Yeah, I think the issue is that our bats are so small. My understanding is of the technology, because I'm not, this is not my thing, the technology on GPS trackers, because what we would, you know, the idea, the brilliant thing, if we could get a GPS tracker small enough to put on the back of a Pekapeka, that would be brilliant, because I could have like many less sleepless nights, but also be out of a job. But if we could get a GPS small enough, that would be brilliant. But supposedly that just has not been done yet. And I think there has been a GPS tracker that is small enough that can go on sort of slightly larger bats, but not for ours, which is one, you know, a small micro bat.
and anything too big would just, it wouldn't be able to fly, and it would just affect its behavior, and it would be really unsafe for it. So at the moment, the only solution we have is this really kind of clunky old radio tracking, which is, it seems like it's something from the 70s, walking around with these aerials and listening to beeping noises, but it works, and it is unfortunately the only way we've got to do it at the moment.
And Fiona, I know that you answered that to me, but the question about the recapturing, but do you want to just kind of just recap that, because we had a question through from Amand Weaver about asking if any were recaptured in the study.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question that you've asked actually about recapturing. I'm not sure if you meant within the same survey session or within future survey sessions, but to our knowledge, we didn't recapture any bats. And I suppose the only way that we would know if we were recapturing bats is if we were recapturing bats in future sessions. And the way that we would know that is when the transmitter falls off the back of the bat, it actually unfortunately leaves a little bald patch on the back of the bat. So in other radio tracking surveys we've done in other locations in New Zealand, we have recaptured bats with little bald patches, and we know that those are the ones that we've previously caught. So we didn't have that in Auckland, but we do. But the only thing I can say is we don't know that there was those bats that we did release without putting transmitters on them. And we would never know really if we did recapture the same, but it's a really good question.
Thanks. I think the PC term these days is follically challenged.
Yeah, follically challenged.
I'm just kidding. And
given New Zealand, the bat populations are so small in New Zealand, it's actually very likely to occur that we go back to, that you would go back in future survey sessions and just catch the same bats. But we were lucky enough that that didn't happen. But I'm guessing if we kept doing it, it would, if we had enough funds to keep doing it.
I also just wanted to acknowledge everyone who sent through some good bat classroom resources, because I understand there's a number of teachers on there. So thanks, Ben, and a couple of other people have put in some pamphlets. So if anyone who's listening knows any good resources, just chuck them in there. That would be great. And then I can add them to the Facebook page. Now, Susanna Murray has asked why Cody trees, but I think we kind of went through that a bit. Was there anything else? Yeah, I think we've covered that. Susanna, if you felt that we haven't answered that, please just type in again. Tracy says, did you find bats at the filter station? I'm presuming she's meaning in Titirangi. I was wondering if I saw one fluttering there quite early one morning, or are they tucked up in their roosts before dawn? Ben, do you want to take that one?
So not at the filter station. We did find them down at the filter station down in Swanson, down that end. But no, there hasn't been anything found up at the Titirangi end of the Waitakere Ranges, unfortunately. But there are bats all the way down in Huia as well. So the Swanson filter station, we definitely found them around there.
Cool. She said it was the Swanson one, so
yeah, so that's
is it on Christian Road?
That's right.
Yeah, we were going to do that as a location for bat walks. Cool. Susanna Murray's asking if anyone has any photos of the cavities they live in. I don't know if you could have a quick squiz, Ben. Have you got any pics of those? Well, maybe Fiona asked the question or no?
No, not that. I really do need some good pictures of a bat roost. I had to borrow some off some people. But
I've got some.
Oh, you've got some. Amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you have a hunt, and meanwhile, let's see if there's a question on here that Ben can answer. Ben, I don't know if you know about this, but might Pekapeka habitat, e.g. trees, this is from Corinne. Hi, Corinne. Might Pekapeka habitat be better protected through the current RMS reform? I think that might be the RMA.
RMA, yeah. Not sure how that's going to look. Unfortunately, there's still a lot to happen with those reforms. But hopefully we do have some prediction about Pekapeka. We do currently have that through the coming out through the Indigenous Biodiversity Policy Statement, and it talks about Pekapeka and how we need to protect them across the landscape at the landscape scale, which is really, really important. We're not just looking at individual trees anymore. We just look at whole of landscape scale to try and protect our Pekapeka across as they travel. They're highly mobile, so they move across a big landscape. So we need to make sure they're protecting large tracts of habitat.
Great. Thank you. How did you go, Fiona? Any luck here, or should we go for another question?
I do. We kept a log. I mean, I've got a spreadsheet with all the roost locations in the Waitakeres and with a photo. I suppose I'll put one in.
If you could share, maybe you could share your screen.
Oh yeah. The difficulty with the kauri trees and the Waitakeres in trying to determine where the roosts are is the size and the height of them. So sometimes it was just a best guess. Can you see my screen?
We can see that. Yep.
Yeah. So obviously we would only often be guessing as particularly when we're coming back in the daytime to take a photo of that tree. Sometimes we would just see bats emerging from like a location up high in the kauri.
Right. If you can show us with your mouse, because we can see your mouse, if you can see any of the locations so that we can kind of figure out.
Yeah, so hold on. So say for example that trunk of that kauri tree, there's a small hole in that kauri tree.
Yeah. That
might have been a roost location.
Oh wow.
Sometimes they can just be roosting up amongst the epiphytes. Where the which are the little kind of shrubby things growing on the kauris. So I'm just trying to.
So unlike overseas, there wouldn't be a lot of external signs. Sometimes in the big ones overseas, you can see all the guano coming out of the tree because they roost in really, really large numbers overseas. But our long-tailed bat, our Pekapeka Tāmaki don't roost in those such large numbers, so you wouldn't be able to see any such a external sign all the time. What's
guano for the kids at home who don't know that word?
Bat poo.
Thank you.
So you can see this kauri tree here. I mean, there's so much going on with all these branches and everything that's growing on it. They could be roosting in some flaking bark. It could be a crevice in the branches. It could be behind one of the epiphytes. They really don't need a large space.
It's interesting because I guess like a lot of people, when you think of a bat roost, you think of like a hole in a hollow tree, but that's not the case with ours, is it? Like as we said before, with Cody trees, it could just be under a little gap in loose bark, couldn't it? So it doesn't have to be actually in the tree, does it?
No, and I think generally if it's a maternity roost or a roost that there's going to be a larger number of bats using, it would be a hollow or somewhere where they can move in. But if it's an individual bat, which often they do, they'll just maybe roost at one location for one night and then move on. It wouldn't need to be anywhere particularly big at all. So this kauri tree that we took the photo of here that we determined was a roost. Yeah, we would never have been. Unfortunately, we're unable to actually zone in on the exact roost location. In other locations that we've done radio tracking in, say in Hamilton, where they're not using exotic trees, so they're using things like willows that are quite low lying, and even native trees like kahikateas, we're able to actually zone in right on the roost location, and it may even be just above head height. You can actually see that roost so clearly.
Oh, cool.
It's so different with these kauri trees. They're just such amazing giants. We're just never able to actually exactly know.
Thanks for showing us those photos.
The trouble is also that we won't always know that the bats won't necessarily come back to that roost tree ever again. So once you find a roost tree, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've found bats, because they might move on very quickly.
We've just got a question relating to that, which is how many Pekapeka in a roost? Any ideas on those?
Ooh. Sometimes up to 100 or more, but sometimes they're just sometimes it can be, like Fiona said, roosting on their own. So it really depends on what time of year and if they've got any snuggle buddies with them.
Oh, lucky. Now, Beth, the lovely Beth, has said, if we go out bat spotting, what should we do if we hear a Pekapeka? Maybe Ben, what would you recommend that people do? Obviously, you can you could put it on, what's that app called?
You can put it on iNaturalist.
iNaturalist, yeah.
Yeah, you can definitely do that. I'd really like it if people could report it somewhere. And at the moment, the Pekapeka Alliance is working on that to try and be able to report bat sightings. But at the moment, we don't really have that. So we're really just asking people to keep a record of it. Maybe you can get in touch with me or Fiona and we can put it in a record somewhere because we really want to try and get as much information as we can.
Cool, thank you for that. Now, Bella asks, do Pekapeka feed along the arms of estuaries as well as streams? Good question.
Really good question. I don't think there's been a lot of research about bats feeding over salt water. There's overseas the same genus in Australia of long-tailed bats. They roost in mangroves, but we don't really know much more about how our bats will travel across salt water. For instance, going from Huia in the Waitākere Ranges across to Awhitu Peninsula, whether the bats would do that or not. It's still a lot of things we don't know.
Yeah, I guess sorry, you go.
No, I was just going to say, I've heard from some fellow ecologists who live out at Raglan and have done put out their bat monitors in their spare time, that they have detected bats, long-tailed bats on the coast out there in quite coastal areas. But I think it's just something they've been casually recording, hasn't quite been published yet.
Yeah, it's all that's the exciting thing about Pekapeka is it's all very new. Like this research was only, as we said, 2 years ago. There was a guy who found a new population this year. Where was it? The guy near Hamilton?
Down in Piako.
Piako,
yeah.
In Matamata, yeah. So someone in the lockdown, this guy Norm Mason, put out a whole lot of loggers, and he just found a new population. So essentially, we're just kind of waiting to have the expertise, the time, and the capacity, and enough of these loggers to get them out around Tāmaki Makaurau. And it may be that they go. I mean, they've been detected in as far as Swanson, hey.
And Henderson Valley.
Valley. So it's likely that if anyone lives out those ways, actually, I wonder if there's anyone here. Maybe you can message us if you think you've seen one on dusk or in the early morning. That would be really cool to know.
And it's worth saying that in Hamilton, where they've had there's also an urban population of long-tailed bat that they've known about their bats for a lot longer than we have, and we're playing catch up with them. So it would be great for everyone to get on board and and for us to understand more about what's happening across Auckland. Yeah.
Oh, we've got a comment from Craig. I live in Henderson Valley and have definitely seen them on our property. That's so cool. Thanks for sharing that. Now, an interesting one from Caroline. Do bat boxes work? And I personally am on the fence about that. Do any of you guys have any comments about bat boxes?
Well, Fiona will be able to answer this one.
Yeah, so we're quite excited. We how many years ago do you know Ben? Was it 10 years ago?
Yeah, near 7 or 8 years ago now.
Yeah, and a couple of years ago when we were doing no one, because they are so difficult to detect, and as Ben said, they don't leave many markings or guano, so it was assumed that these bat boxes weren't necessarily being used, because people had always assumed that it took a long time, like over 10 years, for bats to get accustomed to these bat boxes. And we ended up finding and tracking a bat back to one of the bat boxes in East Park a couple of years ago. And it was like the biggest news in the bat world in New Zealand, like, oh my gosh.
In the world.
And they finally found a bat is using these bat boxes. First time ever shown in New Zealand that they work. But the interesting thing is that as part of the work that, and this bat box now we have actually worked out is utilised every night of the every day, every night of the year. We've observed up to 30 bats coming out of these bat boxes, this bat box, and there's about 3 of them. They're all being utilised, and as part of the work that we've done for this project that I've been working on, we put up more bat boxes a year ago in the same park and in other locations. And just this summer, we've actually shown that they are being utilised. So after less than a year, we've now got bat boxes using these brand new bat boxes. So I'm not saying that we should cut down trees and replace them, which is part of the problem with getting very excited about bat boxes, that people go, yeah, we can just cut down a tree and put up a bat box, which is not what we're advocating for here. But it is really interesting, and it is really useful information to know that it is an option, even for supplementing conservation efforts in places like the Waitakeres, where we know, even if we've got carry dieback happening, maybe bat boxes might be part of the solution.
Am I right in saying that we don't quite know to the full extent how Pekapeka interact with their roost trees? So if we were also all to get incredibly keen on bat boxes and put them up in our backyards, and then all the Pekapeka roosted in there instead of in the trees, that could maybe have an impact as well, because we don't quite know we don't sort of know what that interaction is about yet, in terms of what the Pekapeka and the tree, how they complement each other. Do you think that's fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's just so much more research that you need to do on it, and whether also these bat boxes have longevity and bats actually survive in them. And we know this particular one from Project Echo has been used for a long time, and it was obviously the bats are very, very happy in that. But I think we do need to be careful careful in their use.
Another research project for anyone out there who wants to do some research. We need all aspects of the Pekapeka researched. There's so many questions coming through. Thanks everyone so much for engaging. So we've got next question: any records of Pekapeka on pest-free islands or just on mainland for the moment?
Yeah, pest-free islands like Hauturu, definitely we've got both the short tail and the long tail bat. There's going to be some
as well, eh? Great,
there's going to be some more bat surveys happening over summer on Aotea. Which would be really, really great. They haven't found anything on Rangitoto or Matatapu yet, but with all the restoration efforts there, it might be only a matter of time. We really want to try and work with a lot more of our communities to try and make sure that we find these bats, because they pop up in the most amazing places sometimes, such as in the middle of farmland. We really don't expect it, so we really want people to be out there looking for them as well.
Anything to add to that, Fiona? Or
I did hear rumours about Tiri Matangi, but I don't.
Oh, cool.
They used to have bats there. They used to be roosting underneath the old wharf before they tore it down. Unfortunately, bats are still on the management plan for Tiri Matangi, the supporters of Tiri. But unfortunately no bats there at the moment.
And a good question, why can't people take the bats over there to release? What would happen?
Well, there's been several attempts with the short tail bats to translocate the bats, and most of the time they've flown back before the people got back. We need to be really careful, because bats are quite sensitive, and they can get quite stressed and get diseases. So we don't want to be taking bats that are a bit stressed out and a bit sick, and then them coming back home and infecting the rest of their population. So we have to be really careful about how we manage that, and we need to respect mana whenua of the place as well, because that's really important to them as well. We don't want to be infecting the Māori of the place as well.
Thanks for that, Ben. So there's a question: have Pekapeka been spotted in the buffer zone of Ark in the Park? I would say yes to that. That was what we saw in Fiona's map, so that's a yes to that. With all these bat detectors, are the bats people finding being reported into a central database? And that was Ben touched on that before, that we don't actually have this kind of information. A doc does have a centralized one though, hey?
So it's just not visible to everyone right at the moment, which we want to try and daylight that data, so that as many people can see where their bats are close to them, and they can report them as well. So that's what the Pekapeka Alliance is trying to do at the moment.
And I think using iNaturalist is a good interim kind of thing to do, because I know as ecologists often when we're doing our desktop surveys, we check iNaturalist. Like we always, as part of our work, check what is on iNaturalist, even though it's not always can't be relied on scientifically. But I'd definitely be really interested if we're doing surveys in a part of Auckland to see if people have uploaded stuff on iNaturalist that they've seen. That would be so useful.
You can't put this it's a little bit limited in terms of how you input the data, because I don't think you can put time but I mean, yeah, you can definitely use it to say if you think you've seen it. And if there are people on here who haven't heard of iNaturalist, download it. Perfect time to learn about that app during lockdown, and you can have a look at what's in your area, and you can take photos of stuff and people will help you ID it. It's a really cool little app which will help you upskill in plant ID and animal ID and all that jazz. Is there any bat survey work happening in South Waitakere? Asks Frederick.
No, not at the moment. We'd love to see more bat research, but it all comes down to funding, and yeah, we need to try and just get more people talking about bats, because the more people talk about bats, the more they're on people's radar, and the more likely they're going to get funded as well. So we really want people to continue the kōrero about bats.
So I think in terms of community Waitakere over the summer, we've got 4 bat loggers, and we're going to look at piha, working with pest-free piha, te matuku, which is that big wetland near Te Hinga or Bethels Beach, Opanuku Stream, and I think Karekare. So we're going to be focusing on those 4 areas, but this is kind of part of the reason why we're trying to raise the profile, because as Ben said, it's very expensive and very difficult to do that research, and there's a lot of kind of analyze, you put out these bat loggers for a week and then you have to analyze the sound, and it's a lot of work. So because they're still not quite as well known or understood, it's the research is sort of going slowly, but hopefully we'll keep gaining traction, and people keep sort of lobbying for the Pekapeka, and then we can continue to do the research. But there's so much that's unknown. There could be Pekapeka where you live there, so it's also quite exciting that we're every time we put out our loggers, we learn new information and we're finding new populations, so that's cool. We've got no other questions about Kodi trees, but I think we've answered that. A question: is it useful to have a bat box in the city, for example in North Shore Auckland, or better to check if there's a population nearby before?
Fiona would love to see bats on the North Shore.
I'm on the North Shore too, and I've been looking pretty hard. I've been looking quite hard for them. I spent put monitors out in Centennial Park, which is next to me here in Campbell's Bay, which is, I think, probably the most likely location that they would be, and I didn't find anything. Sorry,
you go. I'll just say something at the end when you're done.
I was just going to say, I think from the view of kind of education and kind of getting people asking like, what's that, and I think it would be great to put a bat box out, and particularly if there is a lack of trees or habitat in the area. It is something that is being promoted, particularly amongst schools, and as a bit of a project to build them and put some out. And but yeah, I wouldn't be holding your breath about maybe starting to use it just yet, but you never know.
And another, sorry to keep harping on about community Waitakere, but another project that we're going to do as well next year is we'll be working with Waitakere Project, who are based obviously in the on the north, and we'll be training them up about how to run bat walks and giving them some bat detectors. So hopefully that will start a bit more research. If you live in the North Shore and you're really amped about bats, you can donate to our Pekapeka Protection Fund, because we're going to be trying to give most of that money will be going to buying bat detectors, which will be giving to Waitakere. So just another reason to donate to that. Caroline has said, is there a pattern that you can share? I'm really sorry, Caroline, but I don't know what that's about. So if you can ask again, then we can
bat
elaborate
roost
on that?
boxes.
On the bat roost boxes. Okay.
Yeah, there is some online. If you look up the New Zealand Gardener, there was a recent article about that that I helped them put together about how to build your roost box, design on the ones that Fiona mentioned from the ones in Hamilton. So yeah, it's a really simple design, but it seems to be effective. So we want to try and replicate those ones as much as we can.
Great, great question from Jonathan. Bella, has there been many successful Pekapeka translocations? We talked about that before, and pretty much no, is that right? Yeah. Okay. Jonathan says, has anyone tried training detection dogs to find bat sites? Great question. Does anyone know about that?
Yeah, there's been a couple of attempts to train bat dogs, but unfortunately the guano or bat poo is also hard to source, which you need to use to train these dogs. So it's sometimes a little bit harder, and sometimes, like Fiona was mentioning, these bats are way up in these kauri trees, so detector dogs might not be able to sniff up that tree all the way up meters and meters high up in the canopy. So then we do think that dogs might be part of the answer, but they're not the whole answer at the moment.
Yeah, and there's definitely in America, they have had success with that, with training bat detecting dogs. And we seriously looked into it for one of our projects, and there was a dog that we heard was trained. I don't know if you heard about that dog, Ben. There was one in Hamilton, but that's kind of fallen off the radar. Yeah, so yeah, definitely watch this space with dogs.
And Fiona, you've got a comment from Glenn Brown who says, Fiona, we could build bat boxes at the next Centennial Park Family Bush Camp.
Yeah, that's a really good idea, actually. That is a good idea.
I would just like to caution everyone before you get extremely excited about the bat boxes. First of all, pest control. So that's like, you don't want to put a bat box in your backyard when you've got the predators around you, the feral cats, the rats, the mice. So if you're really keen to get a bat box, then first of all, try and get some pest traps and get trapping on your property, because that would be very sad if they came there and then they were gobbled up. So love the enthusiasm, but it would be really helpful to get on the pest control.
You don't want to create a buffet for the possums to use.
A bat buffet, no thank you. Okay, we've just got last question, which is almost perfect timing. If someone else maybe has one more, we could possibly squeeze it in. Do we know when the reproductive season is of the Pekapeka, and any idea of fitness success? Perhaps we need more research.
Fiona?
Yeah, well, bats are interesting, aren't they? Because the reproductive season is kind of back to front, and that when they kind of come out of hibernation is when they actually have their babies, and then they breed. And then they go into torpor. So, basically, bat females store sperm until it's the right time of year, and then they will release that sperm and basically become pregnant and have their babies.
Sorry, the females store sperm?
I believe so.
And what do you mean they release it?
So the environmental conditions are right. If it's like, oh, this is the right time, the things are looking good, then they'll have that sperm ready to go to fertilize the egg.
So they hold it up in them. Sorry if this is getting technical, but they hold the sperm up in them and then they're like, okay, and then sperm and eggs inside themselves. Wow, that's so amazing. That's almost hermaphroditic.
Yeah, and that happens in about November. So they come out of torpor, and about November, December, they're having babies, and it's the maternity season. And then they start the breeding season. So it's just weirdly back to front. It's just it took me so long to get my head around this. I was just, as an ecologist, I was like, this is just back to front. And then,
So could they have, I'm just asking the questions that everyone wants to know, but everyone's afraid to ask. Could they have had sex, say, for example, in June, and then they hold on to the sperm until November? Or do we not?
Yeah.
I think even February, March. February, March is when they're breeding. Yeah. February,
that's amazing.
Breeding season.
A cool and witty pun from Jane, bat to front instead of bat to front. Thank you for that.
But these bats only have one bat pup each year. Sometimes twins, but it's really unusual. But they can live up to, we think they can live up to 40 years. So they're really long-lived for a little tiny mammal.
That's crazy. I'm learning so much. I hope you guys are learning heaps as well. Australian research from Frederick. Australian research shows the thermal properties are better in tree hollows versus bat boxes. So plant more trees as well. Thank you for that, Frederick.
One of the alternatives that is that we are actually using this is, instead of bat boxes, is actually using existing trees that have been cut down as part of say for a project, and using roost hollows, reusing those roost hollows as bat boxes. So what they call natural bat boxes. So for that exact reason is the thermal properties, and it's already a living thing. So yeah.
I've got one question, and then we'll wrap it up. But I think it might be interesting to really quickly talk about the impacts of increased urbanisation. So when we talk about that in the Pekapeka, what are the actual issues, apart from obviously cutting down trees, that are going to impact on the Pekapeka when we talk about urban sprawl and this continued development?
Well, down in Hamilton, where Fiona's been working, there's a brand new suburb being built, and that's really quite near a bat population, and they've decided that suburb is going to be, that whole development is going to be cat free, which would be really, really interesting to see how that works in an urban environment. I think that we can all be responsible cat owners by keeping our cats inside. And like you said, Sophie, some really cool pest control. If we all had a rat trap and a possum trap in our backyard, then we'd be really making a difference for our Pekapeka.
Just for people at home, does anyone know off the top of their heads how much is it? A rat trap's about $30, eh? And a possum trap?
A possum trap would be around $30, and a rat trap you can get for as low as under $20. But do get in touch with your local pest-free group, because usually they can get it for a discounted rate.
What a way to keep the kids engaged during lockdown, guys. Okay, and what someone also mentioned about, or I know that it's a factor for Pekapeka, about lights and development. So do we know anything about what they're doing to kind of stop really bright lights, which will obviously be off-putting for Pekapeka?
Yeah, I think definitely the darker we can keep urban areas, the better. Is just kind of like less light at all. But things are being done, like in terms of the types of light bulbs that are used in street lights and around people's homes. There's lots of research going into light at the moment, like it's quite a hot topic in the bat world. And there's some research projects going on over the summer on that exactly. In some places in Europe, they've found that red light is really effective at not impacting bats. Like the wavelengths, like the color wavelengths, can have a real effect. One of the recommendations in New Zealand at the moment is to have warm LED lights, is kind of what the current recommendation is for which would have the least effect on bats. But also things like shade and hoods over lights, having them quite low. Like in some areas, we might recommend low height lights on roadsides. But then there's always a compromise with safety, particularly with roads. So we're always having that argument. But for urban development, just the less light, the better, and turning lights off is probably the key point. And thinking about using LED lights.
Well, that was amazing. I think we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you both so much for coming. We're going to close with a karakia, but before I do, I guess I just wanted to recap to say predator control, plant trees, and don't cut down your big old trees. And you've come here tonight and heard lots of really cool facts about Pekapeka, so make sure that you go and talk to people about it so that we can learn even more and stop this sweet little creature from going extinct. So I am just going to put you guys on mute, and I am going to share with you the screen with this closing karakia, and I encourage you to have a go at saying it with me if you like to practice your te reo. Kua mutu a mātou mahi mo tēnei wā. Manakitia mai mā katoa o mātou hoa, o mātou whānau, aio ki te aorangi. Our work is finished for the moment. Blessings upon us all, our friends, our families, peace to the universe. And just to let you know that this talk will be available on the community Waitakere, or on the event, which is on Ben's Facebook page, NZ Batman, and Community Waitakere's Facebook page. So if you want to share it with anyone. And thanks again so much to Ben and Fiona for joining us and taking time out of their busy schedule. I personally learned heaps. So thanks, guys. And I hope everyone else has a wonderful evening and a lovely weekend. And I hope we get out of lockdown soon.